3:18. When we come back, a tough topic, but we have to address it. Unfortunately, Tim Hague passed away. We're going to talk about the responsibility of the Edmonton Combative Sports Commission, and did they make an error in allowing this fight to occur? Talk to a guy who follows all of these decisions next on Edmonton Sports Leader, TSN 1260.
This is the Jason Gregor Show on your home for Edmonton sports, TSN 1260.
324 in Edmonton Sports Leader, TSN 1260. Jason Gregor, Jason Strudwick, Mark Majot with you. Tough subject, but we have to discuss it. Tim Hague, unfortunately, passed away yesterday after going into a coma after losing his fight on Friday night versus Adam Braidwood. And a lot of the questions come in, why would the Edmonton Combative Sports Commission, because they're the ones who have the final say. Struds, you can attest to this as an athlete. Athletes, you have the mentality, I can do it, right? When hey, sure, I can get in the fight. If things go well, I'll train, I have a chance. Family might tell you don't do it. They don't really have a say ultimately. They can tell you advice, but the commission are the one people who have no bias. They look at it. They're supposed to be the ultimate defense to protect fighters. When you look at 7 KOs in 22 months and many other things, it raises a lot of questions. Our next guest is somebody who wrote an excellent article, very in-depth in 2016 about the Edmonton Sporting Commission and Pat Reid and some of the bad decisions they'd made, and in a lot of cases, really just breaking rules. So did that occur this time? Mike Russell joins us right now. Mike, I appreciate you coming on the program for RealFightStories.com is where you can read all your stuff. And I remember reading with interest that article a few years ago. I had you on the show, actually. We talked about it. And what was your response, I guess, then from the Edmonton councillor when you put forth all of the mistakes that had been going on under Reid's watch up until that time?
It was really curious because when I brought all of that information forward, different bylaw breaches that had happened, different safety issues that had happened, I was getting kind of the runaround from the city of Edmonton, where I had someone where I had a conflict of interest that I asked be removed from the decision-making process, and they put one of their subservients, up and said that this was their boss. If you could just send me all the tapes you had of the interview with you and Pat Reid. I had a real bad feeling about dealing with Edmonton after that, where I just thought that the corruption was just too much for me to keep pushing forward, because I brought so much damning evidence forward. I believed that it should have just shown that this was something that was inevitable.
In this case specifically, and you obviously, you cover boxing, MMA, all of them, and you follow all the regulations. Did the commission make an obvious error in granting, or I guess allowing this fight to go on?
They did. And actually, I've spent the day kind of pouring through all the different records and stuff, that kind of going through what the process was for Pat Reid to license Tim Hague. And I think the biggest mistake that they made was, as Eric McGracken from CombatSportsLaw.com pointed out, he's a really good resource when it comes to kind of the legal side of things. Tim shouldn't have been licensed until about April of 2018, according to Edmonton Commission rules. So the biggest issue that I found today, going through the ABC website, was that one of Tim's knockouts from 2015, December 2015, was not listed. Neither was a suspension. So, if Pat Reid was going through and seeing all of these knockouts and all of these issues, he would have seen that one. But the biggest problem was he has nobody to blame but himself, because it was an Edmonton event that he did not list on the ABC website.
All right. So sorry, Mike. You know what? Finish off.
Yeah, so there's that, and then there was Tim was knocked out actually it was a sanctioned bout in Lethbridge in April 7th, 2017. He was knocked out and he was given the minimum 60-day suspension. But as you said, the commission is the last line of defense that should be defending these fighters against ultimately themselves sometimes when they're not able to make the right decision whether they should keep fighting. Basically, he should have been able to look through, and I've talked to a bunch of commissioners and a bunch of different directors, including some of the ex-Edmonton officials that were working under Pat Reid and with Pat Reid way back when, and they say that there was no way that, A, he should have been licensed, and B, there was no way that any regulator worth their salt would go through the record of knockouts and concussions that Tim has had over the last 2 years and would grant him that license. So, there's some blame to be had even on the people before Pat that gave him a license, but Pat Reid in 2015 did not list that knockout that he had against Tony Lopez at Unified 25.
All right, so take us through the process for our listeners. So there's a fighter, and he let's say he's never fought before. Boom, he gets KO'd. What is step one? What happens with that first knockout?
Step one should be that he's under the care of the ringside physician, who is supposed to be the one that kind of clears him, takes him to the back, goes through everything with him, makes sure that he's got his wits about him, does all the original testing. So I know at one point there was the ringside physician for Edmonton. His name escapes me, but I remember reading through the Senate briefings from when Pat Reid brought him to Senate with him. And Pat actually told me in the interview that he brought a neurologist with him, and that they were focused on concussions and different things like that. And safety-wise, they were, he's the guy that is his ringside physician. So if he's a neurologist, then, I don't understand how Pat couldn't use his ringside physician as an asset and say, listen, here's the situation I have with this fighter. He's had this many knockouts. He's had this much trauma. He's had these issues. Problem is one of his fights, Tim's fights, was in Russia last year. I think it was July of last year. And he, again, was knocked out first round. And I'm told, and I believe he even wrote about it on Facebook, but I was told by someone who'd spoken to one of his corners or his coaches at that event, and they said he was knocked out for a long time and that he received no real medical attention other than he was brought to the back and then he was flown home the next day, which is, that's a big no-no for anybody that knows anything about neurology and about swelling and about brain bleeds and anything else. You don't want to get on an airplane if you could have the potential risk that you could be injured. So, that's another big issue here is non-sanctioned fights. Tim was supposed to fight, he took that fight over a fight he was supposed to fight in England that was a bare-knuckle fight. And I don't know if there was the fight in April that he was just knocked out in Lethbridge, he gave a post-fight speech and said that he couldn't do this anymore because he couldn't put his grade 4 students that he taught at the school that he taught at through it again. So, there's some really tragic and really heartbreaking elements to this story. And I know Tim's got his, like you said, he's got his son and there's a GoFundMe page set up for him and his family's obviously, this is something that they were prepared to deal with. But, to me, I think this should be a real wake-up call, especially for Edmonton with all of the things that have been going on over the years that, we've talked about it before. Councillor Ron Hayter started this, and he, this never would have happened under his watch, we'll say.
Mike Russell joins us from RealLifeStories.com discussing the unfortunate passing of Tim Hague. Real Fight Stories, not Real Life Stories, RealFightStories.com. Sorry about that, Mike. But, it is real life for sure. And So moving forward now, and because, in mixed martial arts and boxing, we've had people that pass away, later on due to being in the ring. What is the next step now? Now, the commission has said they're doing a review themselves of, and I'm sure maybe they'll look at the official and try to point blame at themselves. But, they're the ones who decided the officials were competent. So I'm not sure how they can suddenly not say. And plus, this official, whose name escapes me right now, has been he's been an official or refereed fights all over the world. This is not some rookie. He's been in the ring a long time. So who then is the one who maybe has to look to see if the commission was at fault? Like, who monitors the Edmonton Commission? Is it Edmonton City, like the city council, or is it another governing body above them? Who does it?
It's actually the community standards branch of the city of Edmonton that is supposed to be monitoring that. But the problem is, as I stated before, when I had, an issue with Pat Reid and the way that he'd handled another investigation, and I put a complaint in, I was kind of given, the shell game of people to deal with that were all kind of related to Pat through different departments that he'd worked on and, were friendly with him or had friends that were friends type of thing. And it was I knew that I wasn't dealing with anybody that would give me a straight answer. So, in my eyes, I think this is definitely something that the police are going to have to probably get involved in because of the death. And I don't know if maybe I've spoken in the past about this with the ombudsman and the Attorney General's office. So, to me, there's just a lot of fault, and Edmonton is very good at deflecting blame. And I had a quote actually I dug up from that same interview there. I'll send it to you afterwards. I think it's on my Twitter, but it was basically Pat kind of foretelling that, when he got this job, he went to the law department and he said, what's going to happen if somebody dies under my watch? Like, how am I going to wash my hands of any real blame if this happens? So, he goes through a whole host of things, and he said as long as we're doing our job, then we're covered. But to me, he dropped the ball and didn't do his job on this.
Yeah, I've seen that quote, and basically he's saying they wanted, that's why they go with McCarthy's certification to ensure all the referees are covered. Then was it a striker versus a grappler fight? Were these people properly matched? Well, were these people properly matched? That's the obvious one, because Adam Braidwood right now, has an international belt. He's a real up-and-comer. He's got his life back in order, and he is a hard puncher, right?
Yes.
Hague even admitted prior that, he was the underdog in this fight. He only took it on 2 weeks' notice. This is one where the commission just should have said, thank you. It's nothing personal, but this is too big of a mismatch.
Yes, agreed. And you know what? People are now trying to compare it to the Conor McGregor, Floyd Mayweather fight. These are heavyweights, and as much as, you can have some harder punchers at lower weights, when these guys hit you, like, your lights go out. And we've seen Tim was knocked out in, I think it was 3 or 4 of his, last 4 bouts. And it was like first round, 1-punch knockouts. So when you get to that point and you're being hit by somebody at that level that's got that velocity and that power behind them, it's a whole different ball game. So, again, you said he took the fight on 2 weeks' notice. His record was 1-2 at the time. Braidwood was, I think, 7-1. Just had won the World Boxing Union's belt too. So he fought a 12-round fight. And Tim hasn't. I don't think Tim's been outside of he's never even fought an 8-round fight. And any of the legislatures I've spoken to said that's kind of how they gauge when, fighters kind of move up to that next echelon where they can do like an 8-round fight, a 10-round fight, a 12-round fight is they kind of gradually go up there. And Tim just was not at that point. And, he'd been knocked out 3 months prior. Most coaches that really care about their fighters would say, okay, you were knocked out 3 months ago. I want you to take, 6 months to 8 months or 9 months off to heal. And I want you to keep going to the doctor. And I want you to make sure that everything's, running properly. Some teammates that I spoke to told me that over the years from, hard sparring in some of the gyms that they were in and, some of the sessions that they had or fights they had, they said that, there were times where they remember Tim talking about how he doesn't remember getting home after these sparring sessions. So that's another issue, I think, is that, you need to have somebody that's looking out for your best interests in every situation, your gym, your management, if you can't trust the commission to look after your safety, then, there's who are you going to have do it for you?
Yeah, well, and that was the point, because ultimately athletes and the family can have concern for any athlete. There's no doubt about it. And I'm sure they'll say, hey, you know what, maybe it's time you shouldn't do this or that. And, healthy egos or athletes, belief in themselves, you need it. But the commission is the one who can just simply say, sorry, this can't happen. They're the ones who have the ultimate power, more than promoters, more than everyone else.
Yeah, well, the irony to me is, remember when Ryan Ford admitted after his one title fight that he had a broken arm? And Pat Reid came out and said, well, he actually told me, he went out and talked about it, so I had to do something. So it was almost like saving face that he suspended Ryan for fighting with a broken arm, even though, guys can break an arm mid-fight and still continue. It was really didn't really hinder his performance, didn't really, it wasn't a life-risking thing. So he suspended him because of that. And yet Tim Hague, was knocked out. And I'm not laughing at the situation. It's just so ludicrous to me that he doesn't see it that way. The same as apparently he has different suspensions. There's a 30-day suspension for an MMA knockout, whereas kickboxing or boxing knockout, Edmonton has a 60-day suspension for it. So, I don't think a knockout is with different gloves is really that different of a knockout. A kick to the head in MMA is a lot harder than, say a cross in boxing. So I don't get, I think it all goes back to how Pat wasn't really the first guy that was chosen for this job. And he was just kind of given the job because the commissioners at the time that interviewed him said that they didn't think that his lack of sports knowledge would be a good fit, because they said it's a very, very serious position. When you're the one that's making these, last minute or life and death decisions when it comes to these fighters, it's if you don't know the difference between, letting a guy like Sokaju take his gloves home against Ryan Jimmo like he did at that MSC event, when you don't know that that's an egregious error and that could be, something fatal that people have literally gone to prison for tampering with gloves, and they were tampered with, that's an issue. And I think, when you've got bureaucrats at the city of Edmonton that are looking and weighing at all these different things and they don't see the issue in it either, well, that's an even bigger issue. So I think the biggest step, and it's ironic that Pat Reid was working to take control of the National Commission in Canada, and he was also looking to take control. If you look through all of the city council notes from the past few years, they've been trying to get the Edmonton Commission to take over the province. So that's a pretty scary thing when everybody else in the province has told me that they would not have regulated that fight, and Pat Reid was looking to take the helm of that organization.
So as far as other jurisdictions, other commissions, is the area of Edmonton, is it viewed as maybe not running the tightest ship compared to others?
Absolutely. And it's funny, I've had even some promoters that have promoted, rather extensively in Edmonton tell me that Edmonton's known as the Wild West of MMA regulation. So, when they're going there and kind of, I guess, maybe abusing the fact that some people can get away with certain things. I've had off the record some of these promoters tell me that they've seen Pat Reid, overlook a few pounds here and there if it's going to mean that the main event's not going to go. And, that glove issue, I was told, was because the gloves didn't fit the main event fighter and he wanted to salvage that event. And then, we hear other issues like with World Series of Fighting where he let a main event fighter weigh in 2 hours before the event just to save the main event. So, again, I think a lot of this probably has to do with Edmonton putting it on the commission that they're at a state right now where they're not giving them any money. They're at a kind of break-even point. So anything they bring in is kind of keeping them afloat. So desperate times, I think, have maybe loosened the regulations a little bit more than they should have been. And it's tragic, but I can't say I didn't see something like this coming.
Mike Russell from RealFightStories.com joins us, and check out his Twitter feed because it's Mike Russell MMA, by the way. He wrote a really extensive article if you want to get more into it. I know he had it on his Twitter feed if you scroll down a little bit, and he'll probably put it up again. But now, Mike,
sure.
What's the next step now? For how can Edmonton obviously ensure that nothing like this happens in the future? Do they need to have a complete overhaul of the entire system? Does that include maybe looking at the people even at the city who are overseeing this because maybe they're not taking it as serious as they should?
Absolutely. And I've had, some extensive conversations with city councilors. I've had some that have refused to talk to me about the situation, basically almost hung up on me, which, I will provide those names if I need to, but I don't think we've gotten to that point yet. But I definitely think that they need to kind of excise everybody that was involved and kind of go through all the people that a lot of these people were appointed specifically by Pat Reid to the commission because he was working with them at the University of Alberta. So there was always this kind of circle of protection that he had where, he was caught drinking at an event, which right off the bat, within a few months of getting the job that they were told he was unqualified for by the commission and that they had concerns, they caught him drinking at an event that he was regulating. Any job, I think he claimed ignorance that he didn't know he couldn't drink at the event, but any job where you're a regulator, could you imagine anybody, like any enforcement agency, letting you drink on the job when you're making a decision like that could have impacted somebody's life? It just, it's baffling to anybody that knows any of these sports and how dangerous they are to begin with. But, again, I don't know how. Everybody I've spoken to that's had any dealings with him and worked with him say they don't know how he's still there. And the only explanation that they have is cronyism at the city of Edmonton.
We got a lot of texts coming in here asking about the event, UFC event September. Does this change that event?
It hasn't yet, but I have spoken to a few of the fighters that are on the card, and there's been some concern raised that I wouldn't want to go and risk my life knowing that this is the kind of commission that is going to be looking after you. If they're going to overlook certain things, if they're going to in one of the articles that I have on my website, Pat Reid rather extensively showed bias towards American fighters. So they're all violent and they'd just as soon shoot you than do this. And I wouldn't want to be an American fighter coming in and fighting against a hometown fighter that he seems to give, special treatment or favoritism to either. So there are a lot of kind of facets to this that I think make it so that it's going to be a very, I don't even know what the word would be for how the event's going to be, but I could see the UFC pulling the plug on it if they've got too many concerns. But again, I've spoken to UFC officials in the past about Pat Reid and some of the things he's said and done, and I don't think they're totally unaware of what's going on. Especially Mark Ratner, I know, has dealt extensively with Pat in the past from when the WEC came to Edmonton.
Mike, we really appreciate the insight. I know you'll have more stuff on this. We'll keep reading about it at RealFightStories.com. Thanks for your time.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Jason. Have a good night, guys.
You betcha. Mike Russell. And if you haven't read that interview, people in Edmonton, you should. That article he wrote back in 2016, and I hate to say, he basically said if they don't change things, something really bad is going to happen.